We've spoken about object constructors in a lot of detail earlier. What we said was object constructors have to be used with the keyword new. What happens if you leave this new out? Bad things will happen. First, before we see how bad it is to use an object constructor without the new keyword, let's first go back and recap what an object constructor is. We know it's a function that creates objects, however many you want, and all of those objects have the same properties. The object constructor function looks like any other function. If you were to just see it written out in code, it looks like any other function, but it's special in a few ways. There are two specific ways in which an object constructor is special. The first way is that this constructor magically knows what object it's trying to create and accesses that object within the function by using the keyword this. Remember that object constructors magically, that is implicitly, know what object they are creating, and that object can be accessed by the this keyword within the constructor. The second reason it's special is that it needs to be called in a very specific way. You simply don't invoke an object constructor like you would other functions. You have to use it along with the keyword new. Using an object constructor involves using the keyword new along with the function call, which is a call to the object constructor. So if you want to set up a new rectangle and you have an object constructor called rectangle, you would say new rectangle and pass in the arguments. An object constructor must be called in this specific way using the keyword new. The keyword new is compulsory for rectangle to work as an object constructor, and shortly we are going to talk about what happens if we drop this keyword. The reason this keyword is needed is that the only difference between calling a constructor and a regular function is this keyword new. This keyword new is what tells the JavaScript interpreter that this is actually an object constructor. It's not any other function call. This new keyword is the sign to the JavaScript interpreter. And what does the JavaScript interpreter do when it sees this new keyword? When JavaScript sees the new keyword, under the hood, it will create an empty object and pass it in to the function that is the object constructor. So under the hood, the JavaScript interpreter will create an empty object and pass it into the function. And remember, this is done secretly as the this object. We've spoken about this being a magical object available within an object constructor. That's the object it's constructing. The interpreter passes in the this object secretly into the object constructor. And this is in addition to any other arguments that the constructor might take in. And in our rectangle example, the other arguments are length and breadth. When the JavaScript interpreter receives the signal from the new keyword, it creates an empty object, this. This is how you create an empty object. Remember, this is logically happening under the hood. You don't actually see this going on. So it creates the this object and then passes it secretly into the function. If you remember the object constructor function, it looks like what you see on screen. Within the function, within this object constructor function, the this object is used as though it already exists, and that's because of what the JavaScript interpreter has done under the hood. It's passed in a this object implicitly to this function. This is how it looks logically. Remember, this does not explicitly happen. The new keyword kind of converts this object constructor named rectangle to take in a secret argument this and return this as an argument as well. So what you see at the top of the screen, new rectangle, is logically equivalent to what you see at the bottom of the screen, where This is created as an object. It's passed in as an argument to the rectangle function, and the rectangle function returns this as well. The one line on top using new is logically equivalent to the entire block of code that you see below. So remember, when you write an object constructor, you have to use the magical keyword this, which represents the object being constructed. And when you use an object constructor, you have to remember the magical keyword new, which signals to the JavaScript interpreter that this is an object constructor rather than a regular function. Alright, done with the reminiscences. Let's see what happens if you call a constructor without using new. This was our problem at hand. We know that the regular way to call a constructor is var rectangle is equal to new rectangle, and then you pass in a whole bunch of arguments. In this case, length, breadth and color of the rectangle. This is the correct way. What happens if we simply forget the new? The object constructor is a function after all, and functions are generally invoked without using new. What would happen if we forgot the new keyword in this particular situation? So instead of having var rectangle is equal to new rectangle, instead we'd have something like this. Var rectangle is equal to rectangle, and we pass in the same arguments. What will happen now? Something pretty bad. This is completely wrong. This is completely wrong, and in fact will be an error. The JavaScript interpreter basically will not know that an object constructor has been called. And if you remember, within the rectangle object constructor, we referenced this. We assumed that this exists and is used in constructing the object, and it has been passed into the object constructor. However, if the JavaScript interpreter does not know that this is an object constructor, it will simply forget to pass in this. The JavaScript interpreter will forget to create a this object and pass it in. When the this pointer is not passed in at all, the this reference refers to the browser window. Window is a variable which all browsers offer to JavaScript, and you can use that to reference the browser window. We used it earlier when we said window.onload and then assigned it a function which has to be implemented after the window has finished loading. When no new is specified, this object refers to the browser window. Notice the object constructor on screen right there. We attempt to use this object assuming that it exists and it's valid and that we can use it. However, since we haven't used the new keyword with this object constructor, any attempt to use this keyword in the object constructor will throw an error. The use of this keyword within this function, if it's not called using the new keyword, is wrong. This will be an error. So if you run this piece of code, this is what you will get. The value of this is the object window. So we are printing out what the value of this is within the rectangle function. It's undefined, and that means you can't read the property length of something which isn't defined. This is the error you'll get when you try to use an object constructor without the new keyword. Not great. So remember, an object constructor always has to be used with the new keyword for it to function as an object constructor.